I don't know what you were doing on the 21st of April 2025. Does anyone remember what they were doing? No? I remember the 21st of April 2025. It was a very strong memory. It's the day that mine and Susanna's lives were flipped upside down. Because that's when Jonah, our son, was born just over 9 months ago. And in many ways, he is a joy. And in some ways, he's less of a joy, especially at 3 a.m. in the night, or in the morning, actually, early in the morning. But one of the things I've learned as we've had a baby is that I didn't really know anything about babies and how they develop over time. I always enjoy looking after children and being with children and then handing them back to their parents. But now I have one of my own who I can't hand back to someone else. One of the things I've learned from reading, but also from just watching Jonah grow, is that from birth until around 6 months, babies don't actually know that they are an individual person. They still think that they are attached to mum. In some ways, they almost think they are like still in the womb with mum, still connected to her. But from around 6 to 9 months, they start to realise that they're their own person, that they are an individual, which is an amazing thing, but also a thing that can bring some difficulties. They begin to realise that when you leave them on their own in their room, that they're on their own, that mum and dad aren't actually there. One of the things that they need to learn is that just because they are on their own does not mean that no one is there for them, or no one is a step away to be with them. Doesn't mean that we're not there, doesn't mean that they're not safe. So sometimes Jonah will wake from his nap and he will immediately cry. Because he wakes up, opens his eyes and he's like, I'm on my own. Where's mum and dad? Where are they? But as soon as we open the door and go in, he stops. Most times. Sometimes he doesn't. Because he now knows that we're there. He knows that we hadn't left him and run away, which sometimes we maybe feel like doing, but we haven't, and we won't. But he knows that we were there, because he can see us. But one of the things that he's learning is that just because he can't see us, doesn't mean we're not there. Doesn't mean that he's not safe. Doesn't mean that he's not loved and cared for. In fact, we're actually watching him with a monitor, the baby monitor. So we can actually see him all the time, even though he can't see us. And actually, the other day, in fact it was yesterday afternoon, we had put him in his bed, turned the monitor on, and he'd sat himself up and was looking directly down the camera, and it was quite scary. Eventually, he laid down and went to sleep. But it's a great lesson for him to learn, and a journey of us becoming more patient people. And as I've been reading Psalm 77 this week, it made me think of that what he's learning, and that how babies develop and grow. Because I think often that can be our experience in the world as God's people. When we know God is there, but we struggle to feel it. Perhaps pain has just dragged on, whether it be through illness, grief, depression, injustice, whatever it might be. Maybe it seems like our prayers hit the ceiling and come back down unanswered. Maybe we just feel emotionally or physically or spiritually burnt out. Maybe we feel let down by the church. Maybe we see headlines in the news of hypocrisy and leaders who fail. I heard of a leader, someone who's written a lot of Christian books, who recently has been found out for having an affair for the last 8 years. And it's so sad. When someone you've looked up to, or someone you've learnt from, someone who you thought was a Christian guy who's living his life for Jesus, and you find out, wow, he's been doing this for so long. Maybe we feel our own shame and our own guilt of our own sin. Maybe we compare our faith journeys to other people's, and we think, why am I struggling and they're not? Maybe we have doubts and unanswered questions. And all of these things can sometimes leave us feeling as though God is not there. Or he is there, but he's gone silent. Let me just read the first few verses of Psalm 72 again. It says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. The psalmist is in a deep, dark place. He cries out to God for help. He says, God, please hear me. He's in distress. And the psalm opens up with this lament. But it's a thing that is brought to God. It's not quiet sadness that's kept to themselves. The psalmist is in this intense place of pain and trouble, who says, I would not be comforted in this time. Now, it's a good question sometimes to say, who wrote this psalm? And often the psalms we've read in the last few weeks have all been a psalm of David. But this one is not. It's a psalm of someone called Asaph. Who was he? Asaph, as I've found out, as I've read and looked it up, he was a Levite who was appointed by David, almost like as a worship leader, or someone who could lead people in the psalms, and in singing and in worship. And Asaph has 12 psalms that are kind of attributed to him. And Asaph is actually someone who has shaped a tradition of worship. A tradition of worship which is marked by emotional honesty with God, where doubt and grief and confusion are not seen as things that are like rebellion against God, but actually seen as prayer that can be brought before him. And it's generally thought that this particular psalm, Psalm 77, was actually written after Asaph by his descendants, who we find in 1 Chronicles, who are referred to as the sons of Asaph. Most likely written in a time of crisis, or in a time of defeat, or a time of drought, or a time of spiritual struggles where God seems absent. And as I've been reading this psalm, I really thank God for Asaph and the sons of Asaph and his descendants. Because these psalms of lament are ones that help us, I think. Because I think often we feel like, I can't possibly be honest with God about how I feel. I can't honestly bring everything I have in my head and my heart and my soul to God. And actually we often make doubt and grief and confusion and struggles with faith to be things that we should just keep inside, keep to ourselves, that God will condemn us if we tell him how we truly feel. This psalm and many others help us to see that these prayers of lament, this honesty with God, telling God how we really feel, is okay. And actually, more than that, God wants us to do that. He wants our honesty. With God, we have nothing to hide because actually he sees it all anyway. A friend of mine who's had many really painful struggles for many years, said to me once, "If you knew the things I've said to God, you wouldn't want to talk to me again. You wouldn't want to be in the same room with me." This honesty with God, where actually we bring our pain, we bring sometimes even our anger against him, we bring to him. And the truth is that God can take it. God is unshockable. Often in life, when we open up to each other, sometimes people go, "Oh, I can't believe it." There's that element of shock. But with God, that is not true. God is unshockable. He wants to know how we feel, even when we're confused, even when we're angry with him, which sometimes doesn't feel right, does it? But actually, this is what a relationship with God looks like. Not just hiding things from him and telling him what we think he wants to hear, but actually bringing all things to him. So what does the psalmist do when he's in this place? It says in verse 3, "I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint." He chooses to remember God, to meditate upon God, perhaps calling things to mind of what God has done in the past, thinking about who he knows God to be. A great thing to do, but actually it says it almost makes it worse. It deepens the pain. It highlights how things are so different now. It says, "I groaned. My spirit fell faint." I wonder if you've had this experience before, where actually looking at who God is, remembering what he's done in the past, just leaves you thinking, well, why do I feel like this now? Sometimes when Jonah is crying in his bed, I've tried speaking to him through the monitor, because we've got this little button that says talk, and you can speak to him through it, to let him know we're there. And actually, I found pretty quickly, it makes him more distressed. Because he's like, I can hear you, but I can't see you. And that just makes him feel even more alone in some ways. So I don't do that anymore. But sometimes we might find ourselves in this deep, dark place, looking back, remembering the light, reading things in the Bible of who God is, hearing his voice, and actually it just makes the darkness feel even darker. As we say, God is love, God is present with me, as we look back at times when we felt him close, we say, why don't I feel like that now? Why has God left me? Why am I in such distress if this is the God who I know? So the psalmist says, you kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject me forever? Will he never show his favour again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in his anger withheld his compassion? So much truth in those questions. He knows that God is someone who is marked by favour, unfailing love, faithfulness, mercy, compassion, but he can't feel it. He feels as though God has rejected him, that God's taken his blessing away, that God has changed his mind and now he's not going to do what he said he would do. He's no longer who he said he was. But in some ways, the psalmist almost answers his own question in his questions to God. Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Well, if you think logically, if it's unfailing, then that's not possible. But often our circumstances can blind us even to what we know to be true, It can blind us even to logic. How often when we have a problem or we're experiencing something painful or something's gone wrong, when someone says, "Have you thought about this?" And then you go, "Oh yeah, it's so obvious, it's logical," but sometimes we can even be blinded to things that are so obvious and cause us to question God. But God remains consistent in his mercy. God remains consistent in his compassion towards us, even when our circumstances suggest otherwise. And this is where we see a turning point in the psalm, where the psalmist remembers again, but remembers a bit differently. He says, "Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord, yes. I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on your mighty deeds." Do you see that now, rather than remembering and comparing and then despairing, he remembers almost as an argument against how he feels. Choosing not to put hope in the present, in the feelings, in the emotions, but actually to put his hope in what God has done before. And it's not simply just kind of nostalgia, looking back on the good old days. Wasn't it great when God did this? Wasn't it great when we didn't have smartphones and social media? That's kind of nostalgia, but actually this is an act of faith. Meditation on who God is and what he has done. Helping us to kind of almost redirect our emotions from our circumstances to who God is. God who is incomparable. He says, what God is great is as great as our God. But also taking it away from just what God has done for the individual, but to what God has done for all his people. How he redeemed his people with a mighty arm. Descendants of Jacob and Joseph. How God brought his people through the Red Sea when he parted the waters and they were able to escape from Egypt. God being fully present, yet mysterious and unseen. And I really like this imagery that we have in these last few verses of the psalm. It says, the waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The depths convulsed. It says, your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea. Your way through the mighty waters. Though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock by the hands of Moses and Aaron. Do you see that at this time when God led his people through the waters, they could have just seen this as an amazing thing that happened. Or maybe said, Moses and Aaron have brought us through this. But actually God was present. The waters saw him. His thunder was heard. His lightning lit up the world. His path. But his footprints were not seen. And it's this truth that sometimes we can struggle to see God at work. It's almost as though God is not there, but we think, well, what's going on? God was present. God was at work. God was in control, using different people, different things to fulfill his purposes. Even in this chaos of them being, trapped with the Egyptians coming down to get them, and then the waters going, chaos, but God was there. And sometimes, as this psalmist does, taking a wider step back a wider lens, to see what God has done in the past, not just for me, but for all his people. It can help to bring perspective, can help to bring hope, even in the darkest valley. It's a good point to make that we don't hear that the psalmist's problems are solved. We're not told that, but his trust has been renewed. And this is what faith looks like. This psalm shows honesty, bold questioning of God, but also remembering what God has done. The God who saved before will save again. And we live in a dark world. But we need to keep this psalm on our lips and in our hearts, knowing that actually it's okay to be honest with God how we feel. As we look back on Jesus coming that first time. Jesus who gave his life, who said on the cross, "It is finished." His work is done, and he is faithful to complete it. Another logical way to think about this, that sometimes we maybe don't think about when we're in the midst of the storm. Jesus was willing to go through pain, suffering, trials, even death on the cross, to bring a way for humanity to be restored, to have a relationship with God, to have hope for the future. If he went through all that pain and suffering, why would he not complete his work? Why would he not take us to be with him forever? Why would he not be with us through all things between now and then? The God who saved in the past will save again. He doesn't say all your problems are just going to be fixed like that. But he does say that he wants us to have a restored faith in him, even in the storms, even in the darkness, that we might see the light of what's to come. But also to know him to be with us, even through that deepest, darkest valley. So with Asaph, the sons of Asaph, his descendants, whoever they are, whoever they were, let's be honest with God. Let's not see our trials, our feelings, our emotions, our anger with God as to what's he doing. Let's not see that as something that is a rebellion, is something that separates us from him, but let's see it as something that can be brought to him in prayer. Something that's brought to him in prayer, not just as, God, I'm angry with you, but as, God, I don't understand what you're doing. I'm angry. Please help me to trust you. Please give me faith that says, even when I'm confused, even when I don't see you at work, help me to trust you. Help me to have hope. Help me to see what is true and to know what is true. God is someone who delights in showing mercy. God is someone who doesn't see us in our pain, in our suffering, in our confusion, and say, right, that's it, you're done. It actually makes him happy to show us his love. It's not a begrudging thing, it's a thing he just wants to do, he loves to do. He does it with a smile, not a grimace on his face. God loves us and is actually, I often don't even think about this, but I think God is actually proud of us in the way we choose to live for him. That in the storms we can say, God is my God, and I will trust him. And that makes him happy. And it's a reminder to us that it is all about him. all about what he is doing. Even when we don't see his footprints, he is at work. Let's trust in him.